you're watching this drawing at double speed. So if you'd like to watch it in real time, use the cog icon YouTube makes available and slow it down to half speed. And then you'll be able to see it actual drawing speed. Now, when it comes to drawing foliage, probably many of you, if you've watched any of my many videos on drawing trees and foliage and different types of plants that have foliage, you'll know that my principle is we draw the overall effect, the overall visual effect of the leaves, because there's simply too many and they're too small and it's just impossible. And so rather than trying and be overwhelmed, we take an overall look at the effect that all these leaves massed together make, and we seek to find marks that will in some way capture the feel of that. However, sometimes the leaves aren't masses of tiny leaves, they're relatively large. So how do we draw them when we have a scene such as this with a small pot plant? Well, in this case, the way I draw it is I try and draw the shapes that I see, and I roughly try and draw what I see. I try and draw the actual leaves we have here in the actual positions they have, simply because I find that's easier and more effective than trying to make it up. However, I'm not going to get too upset if I find that I'm not 100% precise in areas that don't matter so much. Because in that case, I'm happy to go with creating the effect we have in the photo rather than the exactness. But the thing I'm particularly paying attention to when I draw this is the way the leaves look. Now, I know the leaves are 3 dimensions, and I know they go back into space and they twist and curl as they go back or come forward, and some of them flop over and have a slight sag across the middle. And I want to try and capture, at least in some of the leaves, those qualities of what they're made and how they're made. But to do that, I find it's easier to look at the large leaves and see them as shapes, not as form. By shapes, I mean just a 2-dimensional shape, as if we cut out each leaf and trace the outline on a sheet of paper. That's the shape I'm trying to see and to draw, approximately. And so I start sort of in the center of this pot plant. The biggest challenge with this is going to be, and I always knew this was going to be the biggest challenge, was to have the plant look like it's coming from a center place and doesn't look uneven. And then also to have the pot underneath look central to it. Be the right size, the perspective angles of the curves as they move down away from eye level increasing, having all those accuracies correct, having the sides symmetrical to each other, and having the center between those two sides feel as if it is in the center of the round pot. So these are the challenges to come, but at this point, I'm now trying to push the leaves out in all directions. I don't just draw in one part, because the biggest problem I'm likely to have if I'm not careful is that the leaves change scale, that they either start to get larger or smaller as I move away from my starting point, and that will affect the overall look. I can always add a larger leaf behind a leaf to balance things out if need be, but too many small leaves will affect the way the drawing looks, will affect our sense of, is this a real plant or not? Now, I think the dark values are really important in this, and so I'm using hatching to catch that darkness. And it's not just the very dark darks, it's the gradations of very dark to lighter that we have as the leaves curve into the light and curve away from the light. And sometimes the underside, which is simply got shade on it, is a lighter value, a lighter dark value, than some of the leaves that have shadows being cast on them, which is darker again, because shadow is darker than shade. So I've been working up to the right, down to the left, and now I work out exactly where these leaves are for the lower left, and that leaf could have been larger. I haven't finished it, but it could have been larger on the right-hand side. You'll notice with quite a few of these leaves, I actually pinpoint where I want the end to be before I start. That's a good way to control the size of our leaf. The other thing I do with many of them, if not most of these leaves, is where possible I draw in the center line, if you like, of the leaf, the main vein that runs down the leaf from the stem of the plant to the tip of the leaf. And then on each side of that, I draw whatever leaf we can see from whichever angle we're seeing it at and how it's curving towards or away from us. So they're all the elements I'm thinking when I'm drawing, and therefore when I'm doing the sides of the leaf, capturing the curls that we see in the reference in some way, at least some of the leaves, particularly the visually prominent ones, is very important to creating a realistic effect. If all the leaves look stiff and rigid and, in a sense, all the leaves are perfectly formed and they all react exactly the same way to how we see them, then that's going to make them start to look more like plastic leaves than real ones. I'm using a 0.2 millimeter Copic multi-liner here. And if you're finding this interesting, please hit the like button. And if you haven't seen my drawing trees and or foliage things in general, even down to grass, which really are leaves, then why not check out that playlist now? So I continue to just work out the last ones. I'm starting to look at the overall silhouette in the reference and my drawing. I am still trying to align where the ends of the leaves are with each other. I'm looking at my reference and thinking, well, the tip of this leaf that I'm going to draw now, how does it line up with some of the leaves I've already drawn in the reference? And then can I use that to place it more accurately in my drawing? The more accurate our drawing is, the more helpful that method is. Now I come to, in my mind, the really hard part. I'm trying to work out where on earth to put this pot. Well, I know where to put it, under the plant, but to do it in a way that looks real at the end and doesn't end up having so much line work on it, drawing and redrawing, that it's actually becomes more visually obvious than the plant. And values sometimes also create that. Now you'll notice I just shifted my paper, and that's because I decided that how I'd drawn the underneath of the pot wasn't very well done to center the pot properly. But I realized that if I turn my paper, then suddenly the original line I'd drawn that was at a bit of an angle was horizontal, and now I could at least have a better go. And this is why when we're learning to draw, we should see what we draw as exercises, not as artworks. Because if I was thinking artwork for this, I might think, oh, I can't turn the paper because then it won't frame properly. Why am I thinking about framing, doing a drawing that isn't turning out anyway? Instead, make it a learning experience. So if I do turn it, so now it's at at an angle on the page, but I have a chance now to draw the pot much more accurately than I could have. So I've increased my chance of learning something. And also by having to turn the page and by physically doing it, and by officially in my mind saying, well, yes, this is an exercise, this is a practice drawing, I free myself to experiment. I make it possible now to really take some risks and to try hard and to try and learn things so that in the next drawing I can get it all done without having to swivel my page halfway through. So you can see why I prefer to draw trees, with big trees with lots of leaves. This this reference is probably challenging in that the leaves are big enough to, I think, require individual drawing, but they're small enough to end up giving us quite a complex scene of forms to draw. Though, as I said, I try and see these as shapes that are all placed in relation to each other in various ways. So I feel like I've really kind of messed up the pot. The base, I've ended up trying to change it or get the correct roundness in it. I decided that my curve wasn't round enough. But again, the fact that I'm seeing this as it's just a practice drawing, I'm learning skills, means that rather than just leave it not looking right, I'll go over it in some way till it looks right. Even if it looks overworked, as it does here, because that's the way we fix in our mind what the right lines don't just look like to see afterwards, but feel like to draw. If we give up or we think, oh, I'll just leave that, or I don't want to make it worse, then we never learn the things that we learn when we say, okay, how can I fix this? What would it take to fix this? If I fix this and then change something else in my drawing, will that work overall? So just about done. Now I'm really going over, really increasing the roundness of this bottom curve, which I've done a few times already. But this is one last time at the risk of really making it look ridiculous. And I thought if I darken this top line, it might balance the line below in some way. What do you think? Do you think I get away with it? G'day, I'm Stephen Travers. Look, I hope you hit the like button if you've got to this point. I hope you have a go drawing this. You'll find the photo on my channel community page. Not necessarily a straightforward subject in many ways, certainly one for careful observation, but one you can experiment with a bit because there is flexibility regards to drawing the exactness of the leaves in our reference. We don't need to be precise as long as the leaves look real. But look, whatever you draw, real or unreal, however it turns out, make sure you have fun. I'll see you next time. Bye.